The sun dipped low over the jagged cliffs of the Arizona frontier, casting long shadows that stretched across the dusty plains. Dust swirled in the wind like restless spirits, and the air carried the faint scent of sage and smoke from distant campfires. In the heart of this unforgiving land, a small wooden outpost creaked under the weight of years, its boards worn and weathered. It was here that a woman named Leora stood, her eyes scanning the horizon, heart pounding with a mix of fear and defiance. She had been sold as a wife for a horse, a cruel transaction that had stripped her of choice, yet she carried herself with a quiet fire that refused to be snuffed out. The man who had arranged the deal, a rough trader named Cullen, had treated her as nothing more than a commodity. He had laughed as he handed her over, the gleam of coin and the glint of the horse's polished coat reflecting his cold satisfaction. Leora had clenched her fists, the memory of her father's broken promises still fresh in her mind. She had been promised safety and care, yet the frontier had proven only danger and betrayal. The wind tugged at her long braid, and she turned away from the fading sun, unsure of what fate awaited her beyond the threshold of the outpost. Waiting for her was Kalen, the apache who had bought her with the horse. Unlike the other men she had encountered in this wild land, Kalen carried an aura of calm strength. His eyes were dark, deep as the desert night, and they seemed to hold secrets that no one else could touch. He did not speak much, but when he did, his words struck with precision, like arrows finding their mark. Leora had watched him from the shadows, her curiosity growing with each passing day. There was something in the way he moved, the way he surveyed the land, that hinted at knowledge and power far beyond what she had known. As they rode away from the outpost, Leora clung to the saddle, her knuckles white. The horse beneath her moved steadily, its hooves stirring clouds of dust that mingled with the twilight. She dared not speak, afraid that her voice would betray the anger and fear simmering inside her. Kalen rode a pace ahead, silent and unyielding, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains that marked the edge of his world. Leora could not read his thoughts, and that unsettled her more than any physical threat the frontier could throw her way. Night fell swiftly, the desert transforming into a realm of shadows and whispers. Stars blinked into existence one by one, their cold light bathing the land in a silver glow. Kalen dismounted near a small stream, and Leora followed hesitantly. The water reflected the sky, fragmented by the ripples of the wind. Kalen knelt beside it, his hands moving with careful purpose, as if the desert itself had taught him some sacred ritual. Leora wanted to look away, but she could not. There was a reverence in the way he touched the water, a patience that spoke of a life in tune with forces she could barely comprehend. "You should eat," Kalen said finally, his voice low and steady, almost blending with the whisper of the wind. "The land will not forgive weakness." He handed her a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside, she found bread and dried meat, simple fare, yet it felt like a gift from a different world, one where survival did not mean surrendering one's dignity. Leora took it cautiously, her fingers brushing against his briefly, and a spark of something unspoken passed between them. The fire they built that night crackled under the wide, endless sky. Leora sat close, feeling the warmth against the chill of the desert air. She wanted to speak, to demand answers about why he had bought her, about the secret he carried in his silence. But Kellen's eyes met hers, and she realized that some truths could not be forced. They revealed themselves slowly, like water carving a canyon or fire shaping iron. The tension between them was electric, a fragile thread stretched across the vast, indifferent wilderness. As the night deepened, shadows danced across their faces, and Leora caught a glimpse of a scar that ran along Kellen's arm. It was faint, but enough to hint at a story of battles fought and endured. "What happened?" she whispered, almost afraid to break the spell of silence. Kellen's gaze lingered on the horizon, and for a moment she thought he might answer. Then he only shook his head, and a faint smile touched his lips, a smile that carried both warning and promise. Leora knew she was not like the other women of the settlements. She had been trained to survive, to think quickly, to endure hardships without complaint. But the desert tested her in ways she had never imagined. The nights were filled with strange sounds, howls that echoed off the rocks, the snap of twigs that hinted at unseen predators, the ever-present wind that carried whispers from the past. Yet through it all, Kalen moved like a shadow, guarding, guiding, yet never revealing the full measure of his strength. By the second day, the landscape began to change. Red rock gave way to mesas and hidden canyons, and Leora felt a thrill of both fear and wonder. She realized that she had been thrust into a world that did not belong to the traders or settlers. A world shaped by those who had lived here long before the arrival of horse and gun. And Kaylin belonged to it fully, like a part of the earth itself, untamed and enduring. As they paused near a cliff edge overlooking a vast valley, Kaylin finally spoke. "There are things you do not understand," he said, "things that are not told lightly." His voice carried the weight of generations, the echo of battles, and the memory of loss. Leora stared at him, heart pounding, sensing that the secret he guarded was immense and dangerous. Yet it stirred a strange hope within her. She had been sold, yes, but perhaps she had not been abandoned. Perhaps, in the unlikeliest of ways, she had been placed exactly where she needed to be. The wind howled as if to answer her unspoken question. Leora looked out over the valley, and her mind raced with possibilities. She could feel the pulse of the land beneath her feet, the ancient rhythms that Kaylin seemed to hear and understand. She wanted to ask about the secret he carried, about the life he had lived before she arrived, but words failed her. Instead, she simply waited, aware that the frontier was vast, unforgiving, and full of mysteries. That night, as the fire dwindled to glowing embers, Leora could not sleep. Her mind kept returning to Kaylin, to the strength he carried, and the enigma that surrounded him. The horse she had been exchanged for had brought her here, yet it felt as though fate had a different plan entirely. The desert stretched endlessly around them, a world of danger, beauty, and hidden truths. And somewhere within it lay the secret that Kaylin had bought her for, not just as a wife, but perhaps as a key to something far greater than either of them could imagine. The first stars faded into dawn, and Leora felt a thrill of anticipation. She did not yet know what Kaylin's secret was, nor did she understand how her life had been intertwined with his in ways that went beyond any transaction. But she knew that this journey had only begun, and that the answers lay somewhere beyond the next ridge. In a world that demanded courage, cunning, and a willingness to trust, even when trust seemed impossible. As the wind swept across the valley, Leora tightened her grip on the saddle, heart racing with the weight of unknown possibilities. Kaylin glanced back at her, his eyes unreadable, and she sensed that whatever awaited them would change everything she thought she knew about love, survival, and the true meaning of freedom. And in that moment, as the sun broke over the horizon, the frontier seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the story to unfold. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wild sage and the earthy smell of the desert after the brief night chill. Leora sat in the saddle, her body aching from the long ride, yet her mind was sharper than ever. Kaylin moved with silent grace ahead of her, every muscle in his frame tuned to the land around them. She watched him, noticing small details she had missed the day before, the way his eyes scanned the horizon even when nothing appeared to move, the subtle tilt of his head that seemed to listen to sounds too faint for ordinary ears. It was unsettling, yet it drew her in. She could sense that his life had been forged in trials she could only guess at, and that every step he took carried meaning beyond survival. As they descended into a narrow canyon, Leora's thoughts wandered back to the village she had come from, a place of dusty streets, sun-beaten houses, and people who had judged her like a commodity. Her father had promised protection and a future, but promises in that world were fragile, easily broken by greed and circumstance. She clenched the reins tighter, feeling the weight of her past pressing down on her. Kaylin had not asked about it, had not probed her pain, yet his quiet presence seemed to offer a strange kind of reassurance. He understood without words, and that unsettled her more than any words could have. The canyon walls rose sharply on either side, red and gold in the morning sun. Kaylin paused, turning his horse so that it faced a small side trail, barely noticeable unless one knew it was there. Leora followed silently, curiosity knotting in her chest. The trail led to a hidden grove, sheltered by overhanging rocks and twisted juniper trees. Here the air was cooler, the sunlight muted, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Kaylin dismounted, landing softly on the ground. Leora hesitated before following, her boots crunching on the dry soil. There was something sacred about the place, as if it had existed untouched for generations. Kaylin knelt beside a patch of earth, brushing aside loose dirt with careful hands. Leora's heart thumped with a mix of fear and fascination. He uncovered a small stone, smooth and dark, etched with symbols she did not recognize. "These markings tell stories," Kalen said quietly, almost to himself. "Stories of the land, of those who walked it long before anyone else." Leora leaned closer, feeling a strange pull toward the carved symbols. There was a power in them, a rhythm that seemed to echo deep within her chest. She wanted to ask what they meant, but Kellen's silence held her tongue. Hours passed as they moved through the canyon, Kalen leading with an instinct born of intimate knowledge of the terrain. Leora began to notice signs of life in places others would have overlooked: tracks of deer in soft sand, the sudden flight of a hawk overhead, the faint smell of water hidden behind rocks. Kalan spoke rarely, only enough to guide her or warn her of danger. Each word felt measured, deliberate, as if every sentence carried weight beyond its surface meaning. Leora realized she was learning more about the land and about him than she could have imagined in such a short time. By midday they reached the edge of a vast plain, golden grasses swaying under a relentless sun. In the distance, smoke curled lazily from what appeared to be a cluster of tents. Leora's curiosity flared, but so did caution. Kellen's hand rested lightly on the hilt of a knife at his belt, eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. "There are those who would not welcome strangers," he said finally. "We must be careful." Leora nodded, sensing that there were dangers here she could neither see nor understand. Every step on this land seemed to carry risk, yet it was also brimming with opportunity, a place where knowledge, skill, and courage determined survival. As they approached the tents, a group of figures emerged, their movements deliberate and tense. Leora caught glimpses of men and women, their faces painted with lines of earth and ash, eyes sharp with vigilance. Kalen signaled for her to stay back, moving forward alone. She watched, pulse quickening, as he spoke to the group in a language she could not understand. The exchange was brief, respectful, yet firm, and Kalen returned to her side after only a few moments. "They know we are passing through," he said, "and they will watch us. Always." Leora felt the weight of the desert's invisible eyes, a constant reminder that she was in a place where the rules were written in survival, not law. The sun began to dip toward the western horizon again, painting the plain in shades of orange and crimson. Leora and Kalen set up a small camp near a rocky outcrop, the wind carrying the distant calls of coyotes and the scent of sagebrush. She busied herself with tending to the horses, her hands steady despite the tension in her chest. Kalen watched her silently, then finally spoke. "You have strength," he said. "Not all who are sold or traded carry it. Many break under the weight. Now do not." Leora met his gaze, unsure whether to feel gratitude or suspicion. His words held no flattery, only truth and that made them harder to bear. As night fell, the stars emerged one by one, brilliant against the deep black of the desert sky. Leora sat by the fire, feeling the vastness of the world pressing in on her. She wondered about Kellen's past, about the battles he had fought, and the secrets he had kept. There was a sadness in him, carefully veiled beneath his calm exterior, and she sensed that it had shaped every choice he had made. The desert seemed to hum with stories, each whisper carried on the wind, each shadow a memory of those who had walked this land before. And somewhere in all of it was the secret that had brought them together, a secret Leora was determined to uncover. Kalen approached the fire, kneeling beside her without a word. The flames reflected in his dark eyes, hinting at thoughts he did not voice. Leora's curiosity burned hotter than the fire itself. She wanted to ask him about the scar on his arm, about the nights he had spent alone in the wilderness, about the reason he had bought her for a horse. But she feared the answer might carry more danger than she could handle. Instead, she watched him, trying to read the silence between them, to understand the unspoken truths that hung like a fragile thread across the desert night. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a distant sound that made both of them tense. A low growl, almost imperceptible, came from the canyon below. Leora's hand moved instinctively to the knife at her belt, heart racing. Kellen's eyes flicked toward the sound, then back at her, his expression unreadable. "It is nothing," he said softly, but there was an edge to his voice that made her uneasy. She wanted to ask, to press him for more, but she sensed that some dangers could not be faced with questions alone. They required patience, observation, and trust she had yet to fully place in him. Night deepened, and shadows stretched across the plain like dark fingers. Leora lay near the fire, listening to the wind, to the distant calls of animals, to the occasional creak of the horses tethered nearby. Her mind raced with possibilities. What secret did Kalen guard? Why had he chosen her, of all people, to cross paths with him? And most importantly, what dangers awaited them in the days to come? Every answer seemed to lead to more questions. Every shadow hinted at a threat unseen. Yet she felt a strange sense of anticipation, as if the desert itself were drawing her toward a destiny she had not yet begun to understand. By dawn, the fire had burned low, leaving only glowing embers. Leora rose, brushing dust from her clothes, and glanced at Kalen. He was already on his horse, scanning the horizon, eyes sharp as ever. She mounted beside him, feeling the rhythm of the animal beneath her, the pulse of the land beneath her feet. The journey would continue, and with it the secrets of the desert, the mystery of Kalen, and the uncertain fate that had brought them together. Every mile, every step, every moment carried the weight of choices made and yet to be made. And in that vast, untamed land, one truth was clear. Nothing was as it seemed, and every secret had its price. The canyon ahead stretched into the rising sun, golden and untamed, promising challenges, revelations, and dangers neither of them could yet foresee. Leora tightened her grip on the reins, heart pounding with both fear and determination. Kalen rode steadily ahead, silent, watchful, and unyielding. The land held its breath, and so did she, as the story of their journey, and of the secret that had brought them together, enfolded beneath the endless sky. The desert seemed endless, a vast canvas of gold and crimson under the high sun. Leora rode silently beside Kalen, her thoughts a storm of questions she could not yet voice. The more she observed him, the more she realized that his calm demeanor masked a life full of battles she knew nothing about, yet that shaped every choice he made. The secret he carried weighed on him like a shadow that could stretch across the horizon, and somehow she felt drawn to it, as if uncovering it might determine not only her future, but the fragile balance of this land. They passed a narrow ridge where the wind carried whispers that sounded like voices. Leora shivered, gripping the saddle, and Kalen glanced at her with eyes that seemed to read her fear. "Do not trust everything you hear," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "The desert speaks in riddles, and not all are meant for understanding." Leora nodded, trying to steady her racing heart, but the sense of unseen watchers clinging to the edges of the canyon would not leave her. She remembered the small village she had come from, where judgment had been swift and cruel. Here the desert had its own rules, harsher and more unpredictable, yet strangely honest in its way. As they rode, the trail curved toward a narrow valley, hidden from the open plains. Here signs of life were scarce only, the occasional tracks of coyote and deer, faint impressions in the soft sand. Kellen's horse slowed and he dismounted, crouching to inspect the ground. Leora followed, crouching beside him. "Footprints," he muttered, tracing the shapes with his fingers. "Not old, but cautious. Whoever walked here does not want to be seen." Leora's curiosity flared. "Are they dangerous?" she asked. Kellen's eyes narrowed. "Possibly. Or they could be scouts. Either way, we must be ready." His tone left no room for argument, and Leora sensed that danger lingered closer than she had imagined. Hours passed in tense silence, each of them alert to the slightest movement, while the canyon seemed alive with the potential for conflict, every shadow a possible threat. Leora's mind wandered to the transaction that had brought her here, the horse, the whispered promises, the fear she had carried across the desert. Was she only a possession, or was there more to Kellen's interest in her than the obvious? The thought both unsettled and intrigued her. She wanted answers, yet every instinct warned her to wait. Patience, she realized, was as valuable as any weapon in this land. By late afternoon, they approached a clearing where a small, abandoned homestead stood. Wooden walls sagged, and the roof had long since given way to rot, yet the place still held traces of the lives that had passed through. Kalen dismounted, walking carefully among the broken boards and scattered tools. "This place has been here a long time," he said. "Long enough for the earth to reclaim it." Leora knelt beside a half-buried metal container, brushing away the sand. Inside were scraps of paper, fragile and yellowed. She picked one up, noticing symbols etched in a language she could not read. Kellen's gaze fell on it, and for the first time, A flicker of emotion crossed his face, shadow of memory that seemed to weigh on him. Leora sensed the shift in him and asked softly, "Is this connected to your secret?" Kalen did not answer immediately. Instead, he lifted the paper carefully, holding it to the light. His jaw tightened, and his eyes scanned the symbols as if measuring time itself. "These markings," he said finally. "They are warnings, left by those who understood the dangers before us." Leora's curiosity grew. "Warnings of what?" Kalen shook his head. "I cannot tell you yet. Not until the time is right. But know, the desert carries memories, and some are best left undisturbed until one is prepared." The sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the homestead. Leora's mind raced with possibilities. Could the warnings be about enemies, hidden treasures, or something far older and more dangerous than either of them had imagined? Kalen set up a small camp within the ruins, the firelight flickering across his sharp features. Leora kept watch as he worked, noting the precision in his movements, the silent awareness that seemed to anticipate threats before they appeared. There was a tension in him that she could not pierce, a barrier that made the desert's mysteries feel even more urgent. That night, as the stars blinked to life above them, distant noises carried across the valley. Leora's pulse quickened. Footsteps. Or perhaps the wind playing tricks. Kellen's hand rested lightly on the knife at his belt, muscles coiled as if ready to strike. "Someone is near," he murmured. "Something." The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of unspoken threats. Leora strained her eyes toward the darkness, wishing she could see more than shadows. Every instinct screamed that danger was closer than they realized. In the days that followed, their journey continued with cautious precision. Leora began to notice small patterns in Kellen's behavior, how he listened to the wind, how he moved silently across rocky terrain, how he spoke with respect to the land as if it were a living entity. She began to understand that his secret was not only about himself, but about the desert itself, about knowledge that had been passed down through generations, hidden from those who would misuse it. And yet, despite the hints she gleaned, the full truth remained frustratingly out of reach. At times, Kalen spoke of past battles and cryptic fragments, revealing pieces of his life without giving the whole story. A raid by strangers, a betrayal that left scars not only on his body but in his mind. A loss that had shaped his choices. These glimpses fueled Leora's imagination, building a picture of a man forged in hardship, cunning, and survival. She wondered if she had been brought here as part of some greater plan, a role in a story she could not yet read. Every question she asked seemed to lead to more questions, every hint of an answer deepening the mystery. One afternoon, as they navigated a particularly treacherous ridge, Leora slipped, her horse stumbling near the edge of a steep drop. Kellen's hand shot out, gripping hers with strength that left no room for fear. "Watch yourself," he said, his voice sharp, carrying an edge that made her heart jump. "The land does not forgive mistakes." She nodded, shaken but not broken, realizing that survival depended not only on skill but on trust, and trust in Kalen was a fragile, dangerous thing. Yet despite the tension, a strange bond began to form, built on necessity, instinct, and a shared understanding of the harsh world around them. As night fell again, they camped under the stars, the wind carrying the distant howl of wolves and the faint crackle of dry brush. Leora studied Kalen, noticing the way his eyes caught the firelight, revealing a depth of thought she could not penetrate. She thought of the warnings, the markings, the mysterious homestead, and the footprints they had followed. Something was coming. She could feel it, a convergence of forces, of secrets, of dangers hidden just beyond the horizon. And when it came, she would have to be ready, not only to survive but to face truths she could not yet imagine. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a landscape of beauty, peril, and hidden stories. Leora's journey with Kalen had become more than escape. It was a test, a revelation, and a challenge that would push her to the limits of endurance, courage, and understanding. Every night brought new questions, every day new threats. And yet the secret at the heart of Kellen's past remained just out of reach, a promise of danger and discovery waiting in the shadows. And somewhere, in the shifting sands and the hidden canyons, the forces that had brought them together were gathering, shaping a story that neither of them could yet control. The wind rose suddenly, sweeping across the valley with a force that shook the camp. Leora tightened her grip on her cloak, heart racing. Kaelin stood, scanning the horizon, knife at the ready, eyes dark and alert. "They are coming," he said simply, and for the first time Leora saw a hint of the storm that had shaped him. The desert seemed to hold its breath, the night stretching endlessly ahead, carrying threats, secrets, and challenges that would test every skill, every instinct, and every truth she had yet to discover. And as the first shadow moved along the distant ridge, Leora understood that the real journey, the one that would reveal Kellen's secret and test her own courage, was only just beginning. The sun had disappeared behind the jagged horizon, leaving the desert awash in a deep, restless twilight. Shadows stretched like fingers across the valley floor, and the wind carried a cold whisper that made Leora tighten her cloak around her shoulders. She rode beside Kaelin, heart pounding, senses sharpened to the slightest movement. Every ridge, every canyon bend seemed to hide a threat, every rustle of brush a warning. She had learned in the past days that the desert demanded vigilance. Yet this night felt different, heavier, charged, as if the land itself was holding its breath in anticipation. Kellen's horse moved steadily, muscles tense, ears flicking to catch the faintest sound. He rode without speaking, yet his presence filled every corner of her awareness. Leora could feel his alertness, the way he seemed to sense danger before it appeared, and she understood why he had survived so many battles that remained hidden from her. There was a story etched into his very being, one that had shaped the man she now followed into the unknown. And she felt, deep down, that the approaching night would reveal more than she had ever anticipated. They reached the edge of a canyon, narrow and treacherous, where the wind shrieked through jagged rocks like a living thing. Kaelin stopped, his dark eyes scanning the cliffs above and below. "We are being watched," he said, his voice low, calm, but edged with steel. "Always. Whoever comes for us will not hesitate." Leora's pulse quickened. She had felt the invisible eyes before, in tracks, in footprints, in the distant rustle of animals. But now it was different. This threat was human, deliberate, and approaching. She gripped her reins tighter, every nerve screaming with anticipation. Kaelin dismounted first, landing softly on the sandy ground. Leora followed, her boots crunching against the gravel, alert to every sound. Kellen's hand rested on the hilt of his knife, the other brushing the reins of her horse. "Stay close," he murmured. "Do not move until I tell you." She nodded, understanding the weight behind his caution. Something was coming, something that would test their skill, courage, and trust in ways neither could yet fully predict. From the shadows above, figures emerged, 5 of them, riding fast, faces obscured by scarves, eyes sharp with intent. Leora's breath caught, but Kellen's calm did not falter. He moved with a predator's precision, positioning himself between her and the attackers. The horses snorted nervously, stamping the earth as the figures drew nearer. "Keep your focus," Kaelin said, voice barely above a whisper. "They will try to unsettle you, to make mistakes cost you." Leora's hands shook, but she forced herself to steady them. She had come too far, learned too much, to falter now. The first rider slowed, pulling the reins abruptly, signaling a pause. Kaelin stepped forward, knife glinting faintly in the moonlight. His eyes met theirs, unwavering. "This land is not yours to take," he said, words clear, deliberate, and commanding. The riders hesitated, and for a moment time seemed suspended, the desert holding its breath with them. Leora could feel the tension coiling in her chest, a spring ready to snap. Every instinct screamed danger, every shadow seemed alive with movement, and yet Kellen's presence grounded her, giving her the courage to stand firm. Suddenly one of the riders lunged forward, a glint of metal in hand. Kaelin reacted instantly, a blur of motion as he deflected the attack and positioned himself between Leora and the threat. The sound of metal against metal rang through the canyon, sharp and unforgiving. Leora's heart raced, adrenaline flooding her veins, but she remained rooted, remembering the lessons Kaelin had taught her: patience, observation, control. The attackers circled, probing for weaknesses, but every move Kaelin made was precise, measured, and deadly in its simplicity. Amid the chaos, Leora noticed one rider separate from the rest, moving with silent intent toward a narrow trail that could cut off their escape. Her heart leaped. "Kaelin," she shouted, pointing. He glanced, eyes narrowing, and without hesitation, moved to intercept the threat. Leora felt the weight of responsibility pressing on her. She had thought herself powerless, sold like a possession, but here, beside Kaelin, she realized she could act, could make choices that mattered. Her fear sharpened into focus, her attention a weapon in itself. The standoff stretched, the wind carrying the tension like a living thing. Leora caught glimpses of the rider's face, a young man, eyes hard with resolve, yet there was a hesitation, a doubt she could not ignore. Kaelin sensed it too, and for a fleeting moment, he faltered, assessing the odds. The rider pressed forward again, faster, reckless, and Kaelin responded with a fluid motion, sending him reeling from the path. The other attackers paused, uncertainty flickering across their movements. The desert seemed alive, the canyon echoing with every heartbeat, every shallow breath, every warning rustle of the horses. Kaelin turned to Leora, eyes intense. "Now," he said. She understood immediately. With steady hands she moved, positioning herself where she could help, where her presence could tip the balance. The riders reacted, startled, and Kaelin took advantage, moving with lethal efficiency, guiding her actions without speaking. Together, they became a force of precision and instinct, a unit forged in silence and trust. The tension escalated, a tight wire stretched across the canyon floor, every second fraught with danger, every movement critical. Finally, the riders pulled back, regrouping at the edge of the canyon. Leora's chest heaved, sweat mingling with dust, and Kellen's eyes met hers. "This is only the beginning," he said. "It will not give up, and the desert will test us more." She nodded, understanding the weight of his words. The danger had not passed. It had only sharpened, carving deeper into the path they had yet to travel. Every lesson, every warning, every secret Kaelin had kept, seemed poised to converge at this moment, and Leora felt both fear and exhilaration at the thought. Night deepened, stars glittering like shards of ice across the sky. Leora and Kaelin rode to a hidden alcove he knew, a small hollow where the rocks offered shelter and the wind was muted. They tethered the horses and moved quietly, every sense alert, every shadow a potential threat. Leora's mind raced with possibilities, the attackers, the hidden dangers of the land, the secret Kaelin carried. Every question remained unanswered, yet every answer seemed to hover just out of reach, a promise of revelation that demanded patience, courage, and trust. As they settled near the alcove, Kaelin prepared a small fire, its glow flickering across his sharp features. Leora watched him, sensing the storm beneath the calm. She wanted to ask the questions that burned inside her about the secret he guarded, about the battles that had left scars both visible and unseen, but she knew the answers would come in time. For now, she had to remain vigilant, to absorb every lesson, to trust in the strength that had brought her this far. The wind shifted, carrying a distant cry that made both of them tense. Leora's eyes scanned the horizon, heart pounding. Kellen's hand rested lightly on his knife, muscles coiled like springs. "They are moving," he whispered. "Soon, everything will change." Leora felt a chill run down her spine. The moment they had been building toward, the confrontation that would test every skill, every instinct, every bond, was coming. The desert had prepared them, sharpened them, but it also promised that the challenge ahead would be unlike anything they had faced before. She looked at Kaelin, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something beyond calmness, hint of worry, of anticipation, of a secret burden that had followed him for years. And in that glance, Leora understood that the coming conflict would demand everything they had: courage, cunning, trust, and a willingness to face truths neither of them could yet fully comprehend. The night seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, filled with threats, mysteries, and the promise of revelation. Every shadow carried the weight of possibility, every sound a warning, every heartbeat a drum signaling the storm that was about to break. The fire crackled between them, small and fragile against the vast darkness. Leora drew a deep breath, feeling the pulse of the land, the tension in the air, the unspoken bond that had formed between them. Kellen's eyes met hers again, dark, unreadable, yet filled with an unspoken command: "Be ready." The horizon beyond the alcove was alive with danger, the desert itself a witness to the story unfolding. When, as the first windswept howl echoed across the canyon, Leora understood that the climax was near, that the secrets, the threats, the choices, and the courage they had cultivated would soon collide in a storm that neither could avoid. Every second stretched, every heartbeat quickened, and the night waited, heavy with tension. For the moment when the desert, the attackers, and Kellen's secret would demand its reckoning. Leora tightened her grip on the firewood, senses alert, knowing that the end of the waiting. The culmination of every trial was almost upon them. The storm of the story, the one that would lead them to the revelation and eventually toward hope, was gathering strength, and the desert held its breath, as did she. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting a pale gold across the desert and the canyon walls. The wind had died down, leaving an uneasy calm in its place, as if the land itself was holding its breath after the storm of the night before. Leora stirred beside Kalen, her body sore, but her mind alert. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and danger in ways she had never imagined. Yet in the quiet light of morning, the trials of the night seemed almost like a test one she had survived, stronger than before. Kalen rose quietly, brushing the dust from his clothes. His eyes scanned the valley below, alert for any remaining threats. The attackers from the previous night had vanished, leaving only tracks fading into the sand. Leora followed him, sensing the tension slowly easing, though the weight of the desert's watchful eyes remained. "They won't bother us again," Kalen said finally, voice calm, though there was a lingering edge of caution. "Not unless they learn a lesson first." She looked at him, seeing the quiet strength that had carried them both through so much, and felt a surge of admiration and trust that had taken root over their long journey together. As they moved down the canyon toward the plain, Leora noticed how different the desert felt in the light of day. Shadows had receded, colors were richer, and the air carried a sense of renewal. The land seemed to acknowledge their endurance, the trials they had faced, and the courage that had seen them through. Every step was a reminder that survival was not just about strength, but about understanding, patience, and the bonds formed between those who trusted each other. Kellen's hand brushed hers briefly as they walked between the horses, a silent acknowledgement of the trust and courage they now shared. When they reached the hidden grove where Kalen had first shown her the etched stones, Leora paused, tracing her fingers along the carvings. Each symbol told a story: warnings, guidance, memories of those who had lived and fought on this land long before settlers and traders arrived. "These markings," she said softly, "they helped us. Even when we didn't understand," Kalen nodded. "The land has always been a teacher. Those who listen survive. Those who ignore it are lost." Leora felt a quiet awe, realizing that the secret he had carried was not just about him or the past. It was about respect for the land, for life, and for choices that shaped destiny. As they continued toward the open plains, Kalen spoke of his past, for the first time giving Leora a glimpse into the man behind the quiet strength. He told her of his tribe, the battles they had faced against those who sought to take more than what was theirs, the losses that had left scars both seen and unseen. He spoke of his promise to protect knowledge of the desert, to safeguard its secrets so they would not be used for greed or harm. Leora listened, absorbing each word, understanding that the man who had once seemed a mystery was forged from courage, honor, and a deep connection to the land they now traversed together. Hours later, they arrived at a small oasis hidden between cliffs, the water sparkling like liquid sapphire in the sunlight. Leora dismounted, letting the horse drink first, then kneeling beside the cool stream herself. Kalen stood nearby, scanning the edges of the trees, yet there was no tension in the air, and the quiet, almost sacred peace that comes after trials survived. "We have done more than survive," Kalen said, finally meeting her gaze. "We have learned, we have endured. And now we can move forward, not just as survivors, but as partners." Leora's chest swelled with a mix of relief and hope. For the first time since her journey began, she allowed herself to feel safe, to feel a sense of belonging in this vast, unpredictable world. Days passed as they made their way through the desert, no longer fleeing but exploring, learning, and building a bond that neither could have predicted. Leora discovered skills she had never known she possessed: reading the signs of the land, understanding subtle shifts in the wind, and noticing patterns that hinted at hidden dangers or hidden resources. Kalen guided her gently, letting her grow, teaching without dominating, sharing secrets in measured pieces so she could understand not only the lessons of survival, but the deeper truths of respect, trust, and choice. Each day, her confidence grew, and with it, the bond between them deepened, built on mutual respect and shared experience rather than fear or obligation. One afternoon, as the sun warmed the desert to gold, they came across the ruins of a trading post. The wooden walls were scorched in places, and the ground was littered with debris from years of neglect.
Oh.
Leora knelt to examine the remnants, finding evidence of past transactions, stolen goods, and notes left behind by those who had passed through. She looked up at Kaelin, eyes wide. "The land remembers," she said. "Everything, every choice, every act of greed or courage, it leaves its mark." Kaelin nodded. "We carry those marks forward, shaping the future, protecting what is good, learning from what is lost." The realization hit her. Her journey had been more than escape, more than survival. It had been preparation for a life that required courage, understanding, and care for all that surrounded her. As evening fell, they camped near a ridge overlooking the wide plains. Leora built a small fire while Kaelin checked the horses. They sat together, side by side, not needing to speak, each aware of the lessons the day had offered. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a living testament to endurance, mystery, and resilience. And in that quiet moment, Leora understood that she had been sold not merely as a wife, but placed in a position to discover her strength, to uncover Kaelin's secret, and to find a future where choice, respect, and courage would guide every step. The final night of their journey arrived under a sky full of stars, vast and eternal. Leora and Kaelin sat near the fire, their shadows dancing on the rocks around them. "We came a long way," Leora said softly, "from fear, from uncertainty, to this." Kaelin's gaze met hers, dark, steady, and filled with a quiet pride. "And we will go further," he said. "The desert teaches those who listen, and we have learned well. There are still dangers, yes, but also opportunity, hope, and choice." Leora felt warmth spread through her, not just from the fire, but from the certainty that she was no longer powerless, no longer alone. At dawn they rode together, horses moving in perfect rhythm across the plains. The valley below glowed gold with the rising sun, and the wind carried a promise of renewal. Leora's heart swelled with gratitude, with a sense of wonder at the journey she had survived and the bond she had formed. Kaelin rode beside her, silent but steady, and she understood now that the secret he had carried, the lessons, the knowledge, the wisdom of the land was no longer a burden, but a gift, shared between them, guiding their path forward. They reached the edge of the frontier where the plains met rolling hills, the world opening wide before them. Leora felt the freedom of choice, the strength of survival, and the warmth of companionship. She turned to Kaelin, eyes bright. "We made it," she said, "together." He nodded, his hand brushing hers lightly. "Together," he echoed. And in that word, in that moment, all fear, uncertainty, and danger gave way to hope, trust, and the beginning of a future neither of them had imagined, but both had earned. The desert behind them held its secrets, the shadows of danger faded with the light, and the journey had come full circle. Leora looked ahead, the horizon stretching endlessly, and felt a quiet joy. She was no longer a woman sold for a horse, no longer defined by fear or circumstance. She was a partner, a survivor, and a woman who had discovered courage, love, and the power of trust in a man and a land that demanded everything yet gave everything in return. The sun rose higher, golden and warm, and the world seemed at peace for the first time. The journey had ended, but the life ahead promised freedom, adventure, and a shared story that would endure far longer than the trials they had faced. Kaelin glanced at her, a faint smile touching his lips. The weight of his secret lifted now that trust and understanding had replaced fear and uncertainty. Leora returned the smile, and in that simple exchange, the desert seemed to exhale. Together they rode forward, leaving behind the echoes of the past, the shadows of the night, and the dangers of the unknown. They carried with them the lessons of survival, the strength of the land, and the promise of a future forged through courage, respect, and unwavering trust. And in that moment, beneath the vast sky of Arizona, Leora and Kaelin found not just safety and freedom, but a beginning that was entirely their own, a life defined not by transactions or fear, but by choice, love, and the enduring power of the human spirit.